Morning and welcome as we gather together to look at this passage from Luke chapter 24 and verses 13 to 35. This wonderful and famous passage, which holds a real place in my affections. The story of the two on the road to Emmaus, who, unknowingly to them, travel with the risen Jesus. This passage has a real place in my heart and in my affections. As I say, it's up there in the same zone, really, as that passage from John's Gospel, where Mary meets Jesus and thinks that he's the gardener, only to discover, of course, upon the pronouncement of a name, Mary, that it is in fact the risen Lord with whom she meets. So here we have it, this passage from Luke chapter 24. I think one of the reasons why this passage means so much to me is, well, it's full of pathos, it's full of drama and poignancy, but I also love it for the way in which it gave me a love for something else, which is a hymn. And the hymn is the hymn Abide with Me. I've known this hymn, of course, from my earliest days of childhood because we'd wait patiently while three verses of it were sung while we waited for the FA Cup final to begin. It's only in later life when I realised that the opening words of the hymn Abide with Me were taken directly almost from this Luke 24 passage that I came to love it even more. For as we know, as the two walk to Emmaus, night is falling, and Jesus makes as though he's going to continue with his journey. It's then that one of the disciples say something that's paraphrased in the words of this famous hymn. Abide with me. Fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens. O Lord, with me abide. Such lovely words, the lovely words in the hymn. They were lovely words when they were first spoken by one of the disciples on the way to Emmaus. One of the things that's always fascinated me about this passage is the way in which Jesus disappears in the very moment when they come to recognize him for who he is. And we know what that moment is, don't we? It's when he breaks bread. It's a fascinating thing, isn't it, that he should disappear in this way when it's taken them so long to actually get to the point of recognition. They've walked all that way, uh, and they've talked about things as they have done so. And then he's accepted their hospitality. And then, strangely enough, he becomes the host himself. And he is the one who, in a very Eucharistic sounding way, um, takes the bread, breaks it, and then he offers it to the disciples. And I've always wondered, is that the reason why they recognize him in that moment? Because not only do they recognize perhaps the Eucharistic act, the act of breaking the bread, but perhaps as he offers them the bread, it's then for the first time that they see the scars on his wrists. I like to think so anyway. Um, we're not told, we've got no way of knowing, but that again, it's all adds to part of the drama for me, and that's what I like to think. But then he disappears. Took all this time to recognize him, and then he's gone. I wonder why that should be so. When I try to look for an answer to this, one of the reasons I give myself is perhaps it's in a parallel really with what does happen with Mary and the person that she thought was the gardener and then recognizes him to be Jesus. For just as in our passage from Luke 24, he disappears upon recognition, so in the passage from John, when Mary falls at his feet and clasps his feet, and he says, almost rather brusquely, really, don't hold on to me. And I wonder when he says, don't hold on to me, I wonder if that's his way of saying, don't hold on to the image that you have of me in this moment. Don't try and bottle this moment as if there's nothing else for you from me that lies ahead. Because if you hold on to me, Mary, how can we ever move forward? And perhaps that's a similar reason to why Jesus disappears upon the moment of recognition in Luke 24. The moment they recognize him, the moment they think they know who Jesus is, perhaps that's the reason why he has to disappear. Because if we ever think that we know Jesus or recognize him in such a way where we sort of think that we've got Jesus taped, we think we've got Jesus sorted, perhaps in those moments he always has to disappear so that we have to discover him again. But the next time we come to recognize him, perhaps we'll know him more deeply than we did before. It is possible to know Jesus, and in the words of an old chorus, there's that old chorus, isn't there, that says, "The greatest thing in all my life is knowing you." And then it goes on to say to Jesus, "I want to know you more." In the words of a more modern hymn by Graham Condrick, we have the words, don't we? Knowing you, Jesus, knowing you, there is no greater thing. And if we really believe that, wouldn't we want to know him more? Wouldn't we want to know him in a deeper kind of way? Why would we settle for thinking that we've got Jesus sorted? Why would we think that we recognize him in such a way that we know exactly who he is when there's so much more to discover? Perhaps one of the challenges of Luke 24 and the experience of the disciples is to ask ourselves, do I think I've got Jesus sorted? Do I think that I've got Jesus taped? Do I think he's the kind of God that I could just simply have in my pocket? So he'll always burst out, he'll always disappear, and he'll always say to you, do you think you know me? Well, you could know me more. Don't you want to? I invite you to in this moment. But how are we going to know him in a deeper kind of way? Well, this passage itself is replete with examples of how we can actually do that. There are other ways, but there are three main examples, certainly, in this passage itself. Let's just remind ourselves of some of them. Well, first of all, on the road to Emmaus, they shared the scriptures together. Notice that it was together, not just on their own. And then they say to each other, don't they? Didn't our hearts warm within us as he opened the scriptures to us along the way? So there's the sharing of the scriptures together. They recognize him, of course, as we've said, in the breaking of the bread. And then once he has disappeared and they have to find him all over again, they race back to Jerusalem for fellowship with the disciples. One of the lovely things about being a Christian is that we're not called to be Christians in isolation, but we are called to be Christians together. And although there are other ways of knowing Jesus, this list isn't exhaustive. It does, as I say, at least give us a few clues as to how we can get to know him more deeply. And so, for example, through the scriptures. And if we're really sincere and serious about getting to know him more through the scriptures, perhaps we might, as we open its pages, we might ask ourselves, am I bringing to these words who I think Jesus is, who I've already decided that he is? Or will I allow these words to show me something more of Jesus that I didn't know before? Rather than me importing my image of Jesus into this passage, will I allow the real Jesus to stand up, leap out of the passage, take hold of my life? And then there's a breaking of the bread. Of course, we're struggling with that at the moment because we're staying at home. We can't be together in one place. And certainly the discipline of the Methodist Church at the moment doesn't allow us to celebrate Holy Communion through social media. But nevertheless, there will come a day when we'll be gathered around his table once more. And as we do so, I wonder if you ever think to yourself, as you're about to eat the bread, drink the wine, that this is a way of getting to know Jesus. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." One of the things perhaps that we don't always realize about the Hebrew mindset is that for them, remembering wasn't simply about calling to mind. Remembering was a more literal thing, actually. Um, you may not know this, but a member is a limb. And when the Hebrew mind remembers, it's basically putting the parts of the limbs back together again. It's actually bringing something from the past back into the present. It's remembering. They did this, of course, famously with the Passover. Whenever they remembered this act of salvation on the part of God, they weren't just celebrating something from the past. Their way of remembering it was experiencing it in the present. So whenever we do this in remembrance of Him, He's truly present in the way that perhaps we cannot fully understand or explain. But as you come to eat the bread and drink the wine, Jesus' presence will be there. He invites you to come and meet Him through the bread and the wine, and then to take you with Him as you rise from His table. And then, of course, there's the fellowship. How important that is when we're wanting to know Jesus better. For I have my ideas about Jesus, and you have yours. I have one piece of the jigsaw, you have another piece. We can just stay at home with our own piece of the jigsaw if you want to. But how lovely when I bring my piece. I'd rather say that your piece of the jigsaw is in competition with mine. Actually, just see how they easily and well they slot together. And as they do, I've just got a bigger picture of Jesus than I had before. So in fellowship, we bring all of our pieces of the jigsaw together. And through fellowship, we come to know Jesus in a way that we couldn't know without it. And indeed, besides this, He says, doesn't He, that where two or three are gathered, there I am in the midst of them. So at least three opportunities there to get to know Jesus better, to allow Him to speak to us about Himself through the Scriptures, to have a discipline of sharing in Holy Communion with the rest of the body of Christ, to share in fellowship, to share our faith, share our beliefs, share these precious truths. One of the other things that the disciples do, of course, immediately once Jesus has disappeared, is that they retrace their steps. They brought all this way from Jerusalem. They retrace their steps and they follow the way back. And perhaps, although in this sermon we've talked about moving forward in our faith with Jesus, there is a place too for retracing our steps if we want to understand Him better, just as those first disciples did. They say, don't they, that we have no choice but to live life forwards. But we often only come to understand what happened to us and the meaning behind it as we look to, in retrospect, we retrace our steps, just as those first disciples did. So retrace the steps back from Emmaus to Jerusalem. I can't help but think of a famous poem that many of us know and love, I'm sure, when we think about retracing our steps. And it's a bit of a cliche, really. And it's one of those poems that we've heard so many times. I never like to use it in a way because I think when something's really been overused, it has a tendency to bounce off us like so much Teflon. But if we were to think about the Footprints poem, as cliched as we might think it is, if we ever were going to use it, perhaps there could be no better time than when we think of the disciples retracing their steps. This passage from Luke 24. If we were going to use it, perhaps there could be no better time than this one. Struggling to understand this pandemic and where God is in all of it. And especially if in any way we feel that He's disappeared and we feel that we're alone. So cliche it may be, but in this moment, we give ourselves permission to share it again. One night, a man had a dream. He dreamt he was walking along the beach with the Lord. Across the sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand. He noticed that many times along the path of his life, there was only one set of footprints. He also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. This really bothered him, and he questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I've noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there is only one set of footprints. I don't understand why when I needed you most, you would leave me. The Lord replied, My son, my precious child, I love you and I would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you.